Elon Musk walked into the dimly lit conference room. 5 of his top engineers, some of the brightest minds in Silicon Valley, were hunched over their laptops, faces tense with frustration. They had been battling a critical database issue for hours, unable to crack the problem. Musk, looking calm yet focused, asked, "What's the issue?" One engineer sighed, "We're stuck on an Oracle database problem. No matter what we tried, we can't make it work." Musk stepped closer, scanned the code on the screen for just a few seconds, and said, "Try this." The engineers hesitated, then implemented his solution. Silence. Then, one by one, their eyes widened. Shit, he's right. How? Musk wasn't even a database expert. He was a software guy, not a backend engineer. But this moment was a glimpse into something bigger, something that would later change the world. Elon Musk learns at an unimaginable speed, the moment that defined him. A few years later, Musk found himself in a much bigger crisis. His dream company, SpaceX, was at the edge of bankruptcy. 3 rocket launches had failed. SpaceX had one last chance. If this 4th attempt failed, the company would die. Musk needed money. He approached his friend and fellow tech billionaire, Peter Thiel, for investment. Thiel, a smart investor, wanted to check if SpaceX was worth it. He said, "Before I invest, I want to speak to your chief engineer." Musk looked at him and said, "You're already talking to him." Peter Thiel was stunned. A few years ago, this man had built PayPal, a software company. Now he was building rockets. But Musk's secret was simple. He wasn't an aerospace engineer. He became one. The learning machine, how Musk masters any subject. Most people take years to learn a new skill. Musk does it in months, sometimes weeks. When he decided to build rockets, he didn't go back to school. He read every book on aerospace engineering he could find. He surrounded himself with the world's smartest rocket scientists and absorbed their knowledge like a sponge. His method is based on first principles thinking. Most people learn by analogy, by comparing new knowledge with something familiar. Musk doesn't. He breaks down a problem to its fundamental truths and then rebuilds a solution from scratch. For example, everyone believed that rockets were expensive. Musk asked, why? Aluminum? Cheap. Fuel? Cheap. Electronics? Cheap. Then why did NASA spend hundreds of millions of dollars per launch? Because they were wasting money on inefficiencies. So Musk rebuilt the industry from scratch. SpaceX reduced launch costs by 90%. When Musk was humiliated in Russia before founding SpaceX, Musk traveled to Russia to buy used ICBMs, intercontinental ballistic missiles, to launch small payloads into space. He met a Russian arms dealer and passionately explained his vision of making humans a multiplanetary species. The Russian smirked and said, "We didn't build these rockets for some internet millionaire to send plants to Mars." Then, as an ultimate insult, he spat on Musk's shoes. That was the moment Musk decided, screw this, I'll build my own rockets. On the flight back, Musk pulled out his laptop and started running calculations. His engineer, Jim Cantrell, peeked over and was stunned. Damn, he's already figured it out. Fail fast, fix faster. A SpaceX secret formula. Traditional aerospace companies spend years testing materials before using them in rockets. Musk, he doesn't wait. One day, a lightning bolt struck a SpaceX fuel tank, denting it inward. An engineer told Musk, "Sir, we need to replace the whole tank. That will take months." Musk shook his head. "No, that's a waste of time. Get some hammers and push the dent back. If cracks appear, weld them." The engineers stared at him, shocked, but they followed orders. They hammered the tank back into shape, welded the cracks, and refilled it with fuel. It worked perfectly. This approach allowed SpaceX to launch its first rocket 4 months ahead of schedule. Other companies wasted years. Musk focused on fail fast, fix fast. How Musk cut rocket costs by 90%. The SpaceX revolution. For decades, the space industry operated like an old boys club. NASA, Boeing, Lockheed Martin, and other government-backed aerospace companies dominated the market with their slow, bureaucratic, and outrageously expensive rocket programs. The cost of launching a single rocket had become insanely high, with no real incentive to reduce expenses. The thinking was simple. Governments were paying the bills, so why bother cutting costs? Aerospace companies relied on third-party suppliers, driving up expenses. Every rocket was a one-time use machine. Once launched, it was gone forever. A single space mission could cost upwards of $500 million to $1 billion, and nobody cared because taxpayers were footing the bill. Then came Elon Musk and SpaceX. He looked at the system and did what he does best. He asked the right questions. Why are rockets so expensive? Musk broke down the costs and realized something shocking. A rocket is made of basic materials like aluminum, titanium, steel, and carbon fiber. Yet, when aerospace companies put these materials together into a rocket, the cost skyrocketed by 100 times. Musk thought that makes no sense. So he did the math. Aluminum costs about $2 per kilogram. Rocket fuel, liquid oxygen, and RP1 costs just a few dollars per gallon. Electronics and software weren't even close to being the most expensive components. So why was NASA spending hundreds of millions of dollars per rocket? Because the industry was outdated and filled with inefficiencies. The space industry was operating like the auto industry in the 1950s. Musk compared it to the automobile industry in the early 1900s. Before Henry Ford, cars were made one at a time by hand. They were expensive and inefficient. Then Ford introduced the assembly line, cutting costs by 90% and making cars affordable for the masses. Musk realized, if we apply the same principles to rockets, we can bring costs down by 90%. 90%. And that's exactly what he did. SpaceX's three-step formula to slashing costs: 1. Build rockets in-house, not through contractors. Most aerospace companies relied on third-party contractors. This inflated prices massively. Example: NASA would buy a simple valve from a supplier. The supplier would add their profit margin and buy the components from another supplier who would add their profit margin, and the cycle would continue. By the time NASA purchased the final part, the cost would be 10 to 20x higher than necessary. Musk eliminated this waste. He brought manufacturing in-house. SpaceX designs and builds 70% of its rocket parts in-house. They eliminated third-party markups. This reduced costs by over 50%. Other companies were just assembling rockets from expensive outsourced parts. SpaceX was building rockets like a tech company from the ground up. 2. Make rockets reusable, not disposable. Imagine you bought a Boeing 747 airplane for $300 million, and after one flight, you had to throw it away. Sounds ridiculous, right? Yet that's exactly how the space industry operated. Every rocket launch was used once and then discarded. It was like burning money. Musk asked a simple question: why can't rockets be reused like airplanes? Nobody had ever thought about making reusable rockets seriously. NASA had tried with the space shuttle, but it was a failure, way too expensive to maintain. Musk said, "We'll fix this." Falcon 9 became the first commercial rocket that could land itself and be reused. Instead of spending $500 million per launch, SpaceX reuses rockets for as little as $50 million. Some Falcon 9 boosters have now been reused over 17 times. This single innovation changed the entire industry. Suddenly, rocket launches became 10x cheaper. 3. Use simpler, cheaper, and more efficient designs. Old aerospace companies overcomplicated everything. Musk took a first principles approach. For example, NASA used hundreds of different fuel lines and valves. Musk asked, can we reduce it to just a few? SpaceX engineers simplified the fuel system to 1/10 the complexity of NASA rockets. The simpler the rocket, the cheaper and more reliable it is. The final result? SpaceX destroyed the competition. Because of these cost-cutting innovations, NASA and Boeing still spend $500 million per rocket launch. SpaceX does it for just $90 million or even less with reused rockets. Even more shocking, NASA's new Artemis moon rocket costs $4.1 billion per launch. SpaceX's Starship can do the same mission for under $10 million per launch. This is why NASA has now chosen SpaceX to build the next moon and Mars missions, because nobody, not even NASA, can compete with SpaceX's cost efficiency. The man who never stops: how Musk saved SpaceX. In 2008, SpaceX was on the verge of collapse. They had 3 failed rocket launches in a row. Investors started pulling out. Musk had one last shot. If the 4th launch failed, SpaceX would die. Musk was broke after pouring his last $100 million into SpaceX. If this rocket failed, it was all over. The 4th rocket launched. It worked. A few months later, NASA awarded SpaceX a $1.6 billion contract. SpaceX was saved, and the entire space industry changed forever. What can we learn from Musk? Musk's 5-step formula for success applies to everything, not just rockets. Learn from first principles. Break problems down and rebuild solutions from scratch. Fail fast, fix faster. Don't fear failure. Just make sure you learn from it. Extreme urgency. Don't wait. Act now. Simplify everything. Less complexity equals more efficiency. Question every requirement. Just because something has always been done a certain way doesn't mean it's correct. What's stopping you? People say Elon Musk is just lucky. No, he learns faster than anyone. He works harder than anyone. He takes bigger risks than anyone. And that's why he changes the world. The real question is, what's stopping you? If you found this video inspiring, hit the like button and subscribe. See you in the next one.